Welcome to the third virtual workshop of the BAFA Accounting History Special Interest Group, 9th March 2021.
So it's my pleasure to welcome you all. My name is Matt Snadi from Cantor School of Management. So I'll be chairing this session today. And we have 3 papers for presentation. And hopefully they're all present. We have the first paper would be the paper by Michael and Cantor, Marina. Sorry if I don't pronounce the name very well, my apologies. And then our second paper would be by Dina Loval. We're still waiting for her. Hopefully she will join very soon. And the last paper will be by Angelica and her co-authors as well, Alan and Lucia. So for each presenter, you have 25 minutes to present your work, and we have discussants who have agreed to review the paper. So the discussant would perhaps give you some few insights. They have 5 minutes to do that, and then they will have the question and answers. So the idea is for you to make input and see how these papers can be perhaps improved. So feel free to make any suggestions you think will be helpful to make the papers more marketable. All right, so as I said, at the end of the session, please feel free if you want to relax for a few chats, that would be very good. So we'll hope that you stay behind if you want to, and then we have some chat afterwards, all right? The plan is to finish at 11 a.m. on the dot. So it will be good if you can stick to time. We'll see how far it goes. Without much ado, I would have to call in the first presenter, Michael Cantor and Marina from Koban State University, Russia. Over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. I'm very glad to be here. Today, we would like to talk about Marina insurance accounting practice in the medieval times. This study was carried out based on archival materials, the preserved account books of the sole proprietorship of the Tuscan merchants Francesca de Marca-Dettini for a period 1382 to 1386. The aim of this paper is to show the result of the study we carried out in the Dettini archives in Brata concerning maritime insurance accounting. Our study examined the specific of Dettini activities both as an insurer and as an insured. We studied how income from insurance activity was reflected in the accounting system, as well as the expenses for insurance in the sale of goods. The structure and content of insurance policies was also studied. The main aim is to answer to such questions. How was information about maritime insurance recorded in the account book of the first proprietorship of Francesca de Marca-Dettini in Pisa? The principal research method adopted in this study is archival. That is, it initial examining and critically analyzing source, which in this case are account book held in the State Archive of Brata. For this was invented the method of logical analytical modeling. This is a flowchart-based approach that we developed to enable entries in the account books to be traced visually between accounts and books and from page to page. This enables us to consider each transaction in detail, trace its classification, and so explain the bookkeeping and accounting methods adopted with the possibility of misinterpretation. Many authors dispute the questions of whether marine insurance was known in Greek and Roman antiquity. But if we make conclusion based on preserved materials, preserved documents, the first insurance contracts were concluded by Italian merchants of the Middle Ages. It is to them that modern economic practice seemed to owe the invention of the bill of exchange, the commercial bank, and most important for us, researchers of history of accounting, double-entry bookkeeping. It also remains debatable would refer to the basis of Marina insurance. Many authors believe that premium insurance originated based on the so-called sea loan. Sea loan was the most popular type of contract when an investor lent his money to a traveling merchant. And the merchant was obligated to repay it if the ship returned safely. Thus, credit and marina insurance were provided at the same time. This type of loan was given at high interest. For this reason, sea loans were considered insurance and forbidden. Later on, such type of cooperation as Commenda began to appear. According to Commenda contract, the owners of capital gave the merchants money to trade as a partner in the enterprise. The Commenda contracts involved not only the sharing of profit, but also maritime and commercial risk was too. The exact date and place of appearance of insurance contracts is difficult to determine. It is most likely that this practice was formed around the same time in different regions in medieval Italy. And thanks to its traveling component, it spread throughout the regions of Europe. A number of documents of the early 14th century contains reference to securitas, or insurance in English. But many scholars have expressed an opinion about the ambiguity of the use of this term at that time. It is worth noting that to date, the history of insurance in the economic literature remains quite debated. But no less importantly, the accounting history literature practically does not examine the issue of the reflection of insurance operation in accounting. As already mentioned, our study of the accounting insurance operation was carried out on the basis of the ledgers belonging to the business of Francesca Di Marca di Tini in Pisa for period 1382-1386. Francesca Di Marca di Tini was a famous merchant from Prata. Prata is a small city near Florence. He owned a huge trading network that operated throughout Europe between 1363 to 1410. In addition to trade, the company carried out manufacturing and baking operation and also insurance. At present, Francesca di Tini archive, which includes more than 500 account books and a huge number of different documents, for example, contracts, bills of exchange, insurance policies, business, and a lot of private letters. It can be recognized as the most complete in content, which allows the study of the economic and social life of medieval Europe. The Tini's business as Pisa was one of his most important projects, along with companies in Avignon, Prata, and Barcelona. The period of business activity in Pisa lasted from 28 years until his death of the Tini that of Bettini in 1410. This slide shows the table where you can see the dates of opening and closes sole proprietorships and companies of Francesca De Marco Bettini in Pisa. This table is structured by using information which was given to Federica Meles in his book in 1962, this book called Aspetti della vita economica medievale. Subsequently, other authors use this information. And currently, there is an opinion that each proprietorship and company was closed and other one was opened the next day. There was the requirement of the closing company, non-using of the going concern concept. It is worth noting the organized system of accounting register forms in all the teams, enterprises, and companies. Most of these books have been preserved and are now available in the Bettini archive in Prague. For the period of activity, each company or proprietorship, the 7% of the accounting books was opened. The silent accounting books used. Memoriale, the memoriale, or in English, memorial, is a book for analytical records. In it, in chronological order, the first information about all the events related to business movement is recorded, which are subsequently transferred to the other register, such as entrata e uscita, libro di mercanzia or libro grande. The memoriale reflected initial information in the purchase and sale of goods, insurance and commission, debts, and receivable. Memoriale could also accommodate other various accounts. The next book, Libri di mercanzia, or in English, merchandise book, a book where merchandise accounts were kept. These accounts were intended to reflect information about the purchase and sale of goods, as well as the profit and losses of the goods. The next one is entrata e uscita. Entrata e uscita, in English, a cash book. This book is for records concerning each payment and collection of cash. Entrata e uscita divided into two sectors. In the first one, the inflows are recorded, and the second one, the outflows, identified the first by preposition da, when it is the company that receives the money, and the second preposition a, when it is the company that pays. These prepositions are followed by the name of the person who was paid or collected, the reason for payment, and the amount of money. The next, Libra Grande, I will talk about quaderno di sicurezza later. And Libra Grande, in English, is ledger. It is the basic instrument of business accounting. This book keeps accounts of the goods and of the debitors and creditors, and consecutive lines of accumulation of the financial result too. All Libri Grande in Pisa were kept by the double entry method. Moreover, the number of the small books named quaderni, notebooks, were opened at the period for register activity or this enterprise. Initially, let's explore the procedure for recording the information about income of insurance activity when the team was as an insurer. In this period under study, in the period under study, a special quaderno di sicurezza, was opened to reflect the income of insurance activity. This book was opened in 1384. Initially, the insurance contract was registered in this book, after which the information was transferred to the entrata and to the ledger. Unfortunately, the use of this register was discontinued in 1384. After the death of Matteo di Lorenzo in October of this year, who was responsible for keeping the account books. But the registration, but the registration of information about the maritime insurance in the accounting register started before the official presenting of the self-proprietorship. The first entries of that were in memorial in 1382. Subsequently, the information about the amount of obtained insurance premiums was transferred to the special account for accumulated income from insurance activity in the ledger. This account accumulated information about insurance premiums received on 5 consecutive pages. On this slide, you can see the example of transfer the balance of account to the other account as a balance of account. This slide presented the diagram prepared by using our research method, logical analytical modeling. The diagram shows how the information about income from insurance was accumulated in the special accounts for that. These accounts were kept in the mingled form or paragraph form, like and other accounts of this type intended for reflecting incomes from other activities. We can see the first account of this slide, which was opened in the memorial in 1382. Then the balance of this account was transferred to the ledger in 1383. Since 1384, the information about insurance premium was transferred from the Quaderno di Security. We can see it in previous slide. In September 1384, the balance of this account was transferred to the merchandise book. Other 2 accounts for reflecting of income from insurance premiums were located in this book. The most interesting is the last account. This one. In the credit in top of this account, we can see the information about insurance premiums in 1385. Debit of this account, it is in the bottom of the account. You can see 3 amounts. The first one is 100 florins. It is insurance recoveries, which was paid to the insured person because the insured event was happened. The ship was captured and all was lost. The next one is 23 florins for soldi and 2 dinars. It was subtraction of mistakenly recognized insurance. And the last one is 157 florins, 10 soldis and 11 dinari. It's profit made on many insurance. In this example, the Tini was acting as the insurer, issuing insurance contract to merchants who wanted to insure their goods. It was this very last sum that was transferred to the profit on merchandise account, avance disavance, formula of the profit and losses account. In the final forms of the merchandise book prepared in 1406. in which the final financial result for the entire period from 1382 to 1406 was introduced. The profit on merchandise account was recorded across 3 pages. It was the account in the bulletin form. The left side is the debit side, and the right side is the credit side. A further study of the accounting and insurance activity in the subsequent periods of Francesca Dettini business and activity in Pisa showed that the special accounts for the recording of income from insurance operation was no longer used. The accountant transferred insurance income to the merchandise account, and in the accounting system of the first accounting period of the company in Pisa, since 1392 to 1394, each individual income from insurance was reflected directly in the profit on merchandise account. Let's explore the procedure of reflecting the information about expenses for insurance of goods when Dettini was acting as the insured. It should be mentioned that Dettini in his activity could be an insurer, in Italian assicuratore, or an insured, in Italian assicurato. The authors have studied the significant materials that illustrate Dettini's insurance operation for the goods and his role as an insured. That allowed us to study in detail the procedure of recording expenses on maritime insurance. For that, initially, it needed to explore the insurance policies stored in the account. There are more than 400 for all periods of Dettini's business activity. For 1383, 1386, the period of our study, relating to the first sole proprietorship, 54 insurance policies have been preserved, including 5 years. For 1383, it was 13 policies. For next year, 1384, it was 19 policies. The next year, 1385, it was 16 policies. And the last year, 2086, it was 6 policies. Every policy included some important information. You can see on the slide this information. The first one, Francesca Dettini's sole proprietorship on company to which this policy applies, for the code and document number by Kaival classification, type of activity, for us it was insurance, assicurazione, date of writing, place of writing, number of page of policy. Sometimes it was 2 pages, 3 pages, maybe more pages, more information about all these policies information. The next, name of cargo insurance, description of cargo volume, premium, interest, road, ships and captain's names. It is possible to find detailed information about each insurance policy on the ICAR's website. It is worth noting that in the accounting system, sole proprietorship of Dettini in Pisa, there were no special account for insurance expenses, and the consequently lies unlike similar accounts for the accounting of income from insurance activity. Insurance expenses were originally directly included to the loss for merchandise. On this slide, you can see an example of how insurance costs, which along with other additional costs associated with the sale of goods, are included in sales losses. The slide shows on one of the consecutive lines of accumulated losses account in Libra Grande Gialla at page 329 verse. The entry on the loss account was transferred from Entrata e Uscita. Sometimes, in our case, the insurance expenses were included in expenses of goods. This slide shows an example of the merchandising account in the mingled form, in paragraph form. When the debit of the account is at the top and the credit of the account is the bottom. The debit of the account reflected cost of purchasing merchandise and any additional expenses that related to the purchase and sale of the merchandise. The account is an example of including insurance expense for iron and iron nails purchased in Palermo when it was shipped from Pisa to Livorno. Subsequently, the additional expenses were included in the sales volume of goods and corresponded to the profit account as expenses that make a profit. It's really very interesting point. The credit side of the merchandise account reflected the volume of the sale of goods, in corresponded with the buyer's account in Libra Grande in the legend. Under the credit of the merchandise account revealed the result of the sale of goods. The result from the sale of goods, profit or loss, as a balance of account transferred to the special account of accumulating profit or losses. For the consequent line of pages as we looked at before. In our example, the profit to florins, this one, information, to florins 12 soles and 5 dinars transferred to the account from many profits from trade on the Carta 44. As you can see, while insurance expenses were included as a part of the cost of goods, the bookkeeper was very careful to account separately for income from action as an insurer. He was also very careful to account separately for losses from action as an insurer. A review of the literature reveals a lack of publication concerning accounting for maritime insurance. Many economic historians have described the development of maritime insurance, but we have very little information about how maritime insurance transactions were recorded in account books in the 14th century. The material considered in this study allows us to summarize how perfected the system of differential accounting of profit and other income was at the time. Insurance premise accounting should be recognized as one of the components that combine to form the overall financial result. Both the system of mutual settlements between the insured and insurers, as well as the methodological support for the introduction of such operation in the accounts in the Danish first proprietorship in Pisa, analyzed here for that time, can be considered subsequently development. At the same time, the accounting of expenses for insurance was far from perfect. There was no special account used by the Danish maritime insurance expenses. Consequently, the profit on merchandise account lacked a corresponding position that held by accounts for maritime insurance in the account book of the insurer. In our opinion, study is an important contribution to the theoretical knowledge in the field of development of accounting. Thank you very much for your attention.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Marina, for that. Thank you very much. taking us to the ancient maritime insurance, which is the theme of this month's workshop. Thank you very much for that. So we'll now have opportunity to hear from Martin, who is still very early from Chicago, to discuss this for us. Thank you so much, Martin. So we'll hand over to Martin for a review of some suggestions from the paper.
Thank you so much, Matt. So, hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Martin Pearson. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, so just a little bit south of Chicago. But I'm so indirectly connected to the BA because I did my doctoral studies in the UK, and I used to attend religiously. So I'm not going to reiterate the content of the paper, of course, but basically, this is a study. Right now, it's about 20 pages, and it's based on accounting books of Francesco Dattini. And to someone that's not an expert in maritime insurance accounting, I do much more recent type of history. Dattini to me is known as what is claimed to be the first business partnerships. It was there's several authors that claim that, but there's one article in the American Journal of Sociology and so forth. So this is the first time that I've read about Dattini in his connection to maritime insurance accounting. And the paper as it's currently constituted, it has sort of two big sections. There's a literature review section, and then there's a quite dense analysis of the accounts themselves. And that's sort of where we are in the paper right now. And I have a few ideas, and I'll share them very quickly because I know that the time is brief. I want to start with the first one, which is the literature review section. And it starts, I don't claim that every history has to have a theoretical framework. And if this turns out to be completely atheoretical, I think that's perfectly fine. And I think that sort of is in tune with a lot of other stuff that's been done in these sort of very early archives. But in the literature review section, it starts with this wonderful sort of paradox between, Dattini's operations sort of emerges after the Black Death, right, the bubonic plague, which wipes out something like a third of the population in Europe, and what we think somewhere between 75 million and 200 million people worldwide. So this is the deadliest pandemic that we've ever experienced. So you have that as the backdrop to this story. And then you have in the archives of Dattini a business that's very prosperous, that is doing very, very well in a period that we know had sort of a downturn in trade and so forth. And the authors set this up as sort of a paradox between what is going on in Europe and what's going on with Dattini and the innovations around maritime insurance and so forth. And it might well be that this is a paradox, and that's just sort of what it is. But I thought that could be a really nice way to actually frame this paper and give it sort of a sort of narrative throughout. And what comes to mind, I'm going to reveal my bias here, but there's a Canadian historian. I spent 6 years in Toronto before moving south of the border, and there's a Canadian historian, his name is Norman Cantor, and he wrote a book. He's dead now, but he wrote a book right before his passing, and it's called In the Wake of the Plague, the Black Death and the World That It Made. And his basic sort of premise of the book is that you have this sort of catastrophe of the plague, but you also have a series of innovations that sort of shape the world sense. And he talks about innovations in institutions and religion and governments and so forth. And he sort of also takes that sort of the sort of paradox between sort of the catastrophe of the plague and then innovation on the other side. And it seems to me that this idea of maritime insurance, and that sort of emerges in Dattini's ledgers right after the bubonic plague, I think that could fit quite nicely into that sort of theme of having the plague and then a series of innovations. And of course, the irony is not lost on me, the fact that the plague would have spread on merchant ships such as Dattini's ships, through the rats and so forth. And at the same time, they sort of offered then a product to deal with issues of risk, right? And you can see how it could be an appetite, and I'm speculating here, but it could be an appetite for those kind of products in a world that had experienced tremendous loss. So that's just one idea, and I wrote down a couple of comments. I can send those afterwards with some more directions. I think I have about 2 minutes, so I'll be very brief. In the paper, one claim sort of to the literature is this idea that economic historians have studied maritime insurance, but accounting historians have not. And I don't dispute that, but I think maybe a cleaner way to cut that is to focus on the literature. So to say that the economic history literature has considered maritime insurance and the accounting history literature has not to the same extent. I think that there's a bit of a trapping when we deal with, who qualifies as an economic historian? Because if we take someone like de Rover, I don't know, he might have called himself an accounting historian had that term existed when he was writing, right? The first PhD in accounting here in North America was in 1939. It was obviously at the University of Illinois. So anyone that came before 39 would have been a trade economist, right? So you think about John B. Canning or Hatfield at Berkeley, William Payton here in Michigan, or A.C. Littleton in Illinois. They were all economists, that ended up doing accounting. So I think that's just a clean distinction. And then I just have my very last point, and I'll be done, so we can move on. The analysis of transactions, that's sort of the core of the paper. And I think it's really, really interesting, and it's well done, it's very detailed. One thing that's lost on me as someone that's not an expert in this area is that I have no point of comparison in the analysis section between what we're seeing in Datini's books versus some of the examples that are reviewed in the literature section. So I think for someone like myself who want to appreciate these transactions, but I don't have sort of historical background to evaluate them because I haven't seen the other archives, I think one way to sort of bring out the uniqueness and how they differentiate from other attempts at insurance accounting in the 13th century, which you cite the Rover for, I think giving some comparisons in the bottom of the paper would actually help me sort of orientate myself and get sort of better appreciation for what they're actually doing in the books that is sort of unique and new. And I think, Matt, I'll stop there. I have more comments, but who doesn't? So I'll be quiet.
All right. Thanks very much, Martin. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
If you have additional comments, please feel free to put them together and send to us. We'll send them directly to the presenter. I'm sure they will appreciate that. Thanks very much. I think we'll just have a quick second for any question or additional comment we can take on. Yeah. Yes, please, Richard, please. Pick one. Thank you very much. Okay.
So I'm sorry, I missed the literature review, but did you have the material on bottomry loans in ancient Greece and ancient Rome, which was their way of doing marine insurance? In other words, if you're going to run a voyage, you borrow money from somebody, but it's not repayable if the ship is lost. So it has the same effect, but you don't pay a premium. You actually get the money, but you don't have to pay it back if the ship is lost. There's an article by Geoffrey de St. Croix in the Festschrift for Will Baxter about ancient maritime loans, which I don't know if you'd pick that up or not. I can send you the details. The other thing is, I've done a lot of work on marine insurance at Lloyd's, and the biggest problem in insurance today, insurance accounting, is how much do you provide or reserve for the claims that you think will come in but haven't yet arrived. And this could take 3 years for a ship to go around the world. So was Datini making any accrual in when he was writing insurance? Was he making any accruals for the potential losses? Or was he doing what Lloyd's always used to do, wait until the ship got back? And then, or in fact, they just did it every 3 years as an average to determine whether or not the ship had been lost.
All right. I think that's a very good insight. I'm sure the presenter, Marina still there?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah. So I mean, that's something we can pick up maybe after the session. I'm sure Richard has some insight on how perhaps the literature can be improved, or if you have that aspect. Thanks so much, Richard. Thanks for that additional input. All right, so we go to our second presenter now, Dina. Yeah, Dina is there, Dina Lova. So she is from St. Petersburg State University. So I'll hand over to you, Dina.
Hello to everyone.
All right.
Yes, thank you so much for the organizers for the opportunity to present my research here. So what was the main idea of the research and why this research is happening? The main figure of the research is Russian Emperor Peter the Great. Why it is so? Because in 2022 it will be 350 years anniversary of Peter the Great, and one of the Russian scientific foundation support researches that introduce Peter the Great reforms in different areas of Russian life. And my research also received such support from the scientific Russian Scientific Fund. So some accent is paid to the Peter the Great activities in public administration and especially in accounting. So the study is aimed to analyzing the accounting model of the Russian Navy, because the Navy was almost the main part of Peter's activities during his reforms, and that's why it seems that study complements two researches of Littleton, Chatfield, Lemarchand, and Legay, who studied the impact of economic doctrines in the 18th centuries, and also it's to some studies of Funnell, Cobbin and Burroughs, and Chaswick, McBride, and others who investigated the accounting practices of the Army and Navy in the context of increasing military effectiveness in relation to social environment and political strife. The research is based on one of the most significant artifacts of the Peter the Great era. It is the regulation on Admiralty and shipyards management, and this document has another shorter title, the Admiralty Regulation. This regulation was issued in 1722 by Peter the Great, and Peter the Great was not only an introducer by this document, but also one of its authors. And historians of Peter the Great epoch well know that he spent a lot of time by developing this document, several hours per every week. That's why we can say that it is not only it's untypical legal act, because it's the legal act was developed by the Emperor Peter the Great itself. The research has three main objectives. First one is to reveal interrelation between historical phenomena of mercantilism, a regular army, and accounting in the context of the 18th century Russia. Then to establish how the economic doctrine was introduced in the Admiralty Regulation influenced the content of this document. And finally, to evaluate the success of the practical implementation of Peter the Great economic policy on the example of naval finance and accounting. I want to start with the well-known piece from Zombard's book, War and Capitalism, where Zombard argued that armies were effective in accumulating capital and creating markets because the need to supply them with weapons, uniforms, and provisions led to the development of the light production units because they indirectly boosted mining and metallurgy and rationalized methods of production and business. The same was in Russia. The need to support the army became the main impetus for the development of trade and later industry. And it would be no exaggeration to say that Peter's mercantilist views and his understanding of the government's role in creating the social wealth had evolved in the course of his efforts to build a regular army. Statistics show that during the Petrine reforms, the size of the Russian army increased approximately 8 times. And since 1718, the army became regular. According to another Russian historian, Milyukov, estimations military spendings grows rapidly during the Peter's reign. If in 1680 they accounted for 62% of the total amount of expenditures, then after 20 years, in 1701, already 78%, and by 1708, more than 82%. And Milyukov stated that the increase in the size of the army was the main source of financial difficulties and the main driving force behind innovations in the field of state economy. Even more significant was the efforts made by Peter the Great to build a navy. According to the data published by Solovyov, Tsvetaev, and other historians, by the end of his reign, the fleet consisted of more than 800 warships, and 48 of them were light battleships, on which about 28,000 people served. And the rapid and repeated growth of the fleet required financing in unprecedented volumes. In the first quarter of the 18th century, its costs increased tenfold, of course, in absolute terms. And so having in mind the need to support and provide for the army, Peter made several decisions aimed at encouraging the development of trade and industry. These were first the measures aimed at overcoming dependence on foreign goods, including the supplies for the army, and the outflow of money from the country. Great privileges were granted to the organizers of factories and manufactories. First of all, it was entitlements to receive loans from the treasury, an exception from paying duties and taxes, the right to engage foreign masters, as well as guarantees for the purchase of goods at government expense. In the spirit of mercantilism, exports of raw materials necessarily for the domestic production were banned, and significant import duties on the goods that could be manufactured in Russia were imposed. Mercantilism influenced the routine practice of public administration as well. And in my opinion, it is accounting that can serve as evidence of this. Mercantilism provided a new direction for the development of accounting. It encouraged widespread implementation of requirements that obliged merchants to maintain trade books and to account for the goods and assets that they had at their disposal. Thus, the famous 1673 Code Savary, created under the guidance of Colbert, included, among other measures aimed at protecting the credit and encouraging the development of trade, a requirement that obliged business people to maintain trade books and periodically collect the information and submit a summarized report of their property. Article 8 of the third title, for instance, provided for the following requirement. During the same 6 months period, all merchants are obliged to draw up an inventory of all their movable and immovable property, all their receivables and liabilities, which are to be inspected and updated every 2 years. In next decades, and it's also well-known fact, the impact of this document spread for the beyond France, and it laid the basis for commercial and accounting law in the countries of continental Europe. Then accounting requirements were applied from this code in the field of state-owned economy, and French Naval Ordinance of 1689 defines the requirement for officials of the fleet and port towns to maintain accounting books and draw up report sheets. And similar rules were later instituted by the Navy regulation and then by the Admiralty regulation of Peter the Great. And here you see the picture of the original document and the title of its first translation into Russian language. This translation was made also by the order of Peter the Great because he asked to gather all the law acts concerning fleet and arsenals from all the European countries involved in maritime activities. The Prussian diplomat Johann Fickerod, in his sketches on Russia written in 1737 and intended for Voltaire, says that the new system of Admiralty accounting was organized along the mercantile lines. And it is necessary to add that its mercantile character had some European features. Another diplomat, Russian diplomat, Pyotr Chadaev, wrote about Peter the Great that he has introduced Western expressions into our language using Western books from which we learned how to spell out the names of things. Peter's Admiralty regulation, and that is Peter's Admiralty regulation introduced the concept of debit, credit, and accountant. It was a new words for Russians. So this words were introduced into the fleet accounting. It was terms borrowed from Western European trade practices via French Naval Ordinance. Books of systematic entries established by the Admiralty regulation also had commercial origin, and the way records were made in these books with the use of the linear method for entering debit and credit was in essence usual for the European accounting practice of the time. You can see on the picture the book that the Admiralty paymaster was obliged to maintain. And the sample of this book was included into the regulation, into the body of the law. The book summarized the information on current operations with monetary resources, and it was used for drawing up monthly and annual reports. We can compare this book with another one. It is a book of stocks accounting, which was to be maintained by the store officer. The layout of this book is almost the same, but the difference lies in the units of measure. It is, in the latter case, these are Russian pads. One Russian pad was about 16 kilograms and Russian pounds. The Admiralty regulations required that accounting should be kept of 4 groups of objects: personal, stock, cash, and budgetary funding. Of course, the Admiralty regulation, being a mercantile statute, paid mostly close attention to the industry working capital by setting up the strongest system of stock accounting. So the requirements for stock inventory accounting were almost the most detailed, and they included the documentation of stock transactions, allocation of financial responsibilities of officials for execution of these transactions, a great number of highly detailed and interconnecting accounting registers, doubling of registers at different levels of administration and collation of registers, joint responsibility for acceptance and release of stocks and inventories, detailed control of all transactions. So this was an example of a strictly regulated procedure of stock accountancy. And this example clearly demonstrates how Russian naval accounting, as well as a French naval accounting, used to combine the ideas of mercantilism and promotion of free trade on the one hand, and absolutism and regulation on the other hand. Berens wrote that Peter understood observation of the laws in accordance with the spirit of his age, so very narrowly. For him, observing the law meant following regulations, directives, and decrees to the letter exactly as ordered without thinking. That's why the regulations were very detailed and very instructive. In support of this conclusion, we can cite the following except from Peter's law. The Admiralty College must always act in accordance with the regulation and directives, never otherwise. Should a matter arise for which no examples of decisions to be taken can be found, report that to His Majesty. And should His Majesty be away and the matter urgent, then, according to the advice of the whole college, determine and decide and add to the existing regulation, and then report to His Majesty in due course. And if it is pleased His Majesty to have this in the regulation, then so it shall be. And if it does not please His Majesty, it shall be excluded. Thus, any professional judgment was recognized by Peter only as an exclusive prerogative of a supreme power. As huge states, therein lies one of Peter's problems. The statutes which were supported to bring about order, enterprise, and initiative originated not in some representative of corporate body, but from one man, albeit with some assistance from information gatherers. Hughes finds an explanation of Peter's authoritativeness and do-it-yourself philosophy in a lack of faith in other people getting things done, and increasingly towards the end of his life, a fear of treachery and intrigue. Instead of this explanation, to understand Peter's motives and accounting principles, it seems equally important to point out his inclination toward military discipline. So, some conclusion of the end of my presentation. The archival documents remain to testify the Peter's diligence in developing the Admiralty regulation, including an extensive section of accounting rules, which no one addressed before him, that Tsar permanently fought stealing and deficits of finance and highly likely focused on accounting as a possible effective measure. Several aspects make this attempt noisily. The regulation improved Russian accounting system, bringing it in line with European one. The French source considerably enriched it by introducing accounting methods previously unknown in Russia. The new objects of accounting, terms debit and credit, the linear notes method of the registers, and other innovations prescribed by the regulation turned out to be of great significance. Russia's economic development became quite significant in Peter's time, giving rise to the need for the institutions which would facilitate proper administration of the strengthened industry and trade, including the terms of accounting. Peter did respond to that demand by introducing an institute of accounting. But it's what sphere he did do it. He did not do it in the industry or trade, showing no interest in Colbert's famous code, but in the army. Out of other countries, adhering to the mercantilist model of economy and administration, France was the closest one to Peter. Having strong absolute monarchy with an extensive bureaucratic apparatus, it implemented the policy of mercantilism, which reached its climax under Colbert. This policy is characterized by especially active involvement of government entities in the economy and direct state engagement in setting up new industrial enterprises, as well as pedantic control over all economic activities. An expression, the Russian version of mercantilism, as exemplified by the Admiralty regulation, was in perfect harmony with the autocratic view to transform private life by the public law and to use detailed acts of public law to regulate all fields of activity, including accounting. The history of the regulation gives us some sort of paradoxical example of commercial accounting rules introduced in public administration and then in turn brought from governmental accounting into commercial one, for the simple reason that both spheres were based on the same principles. And I think that finally it illustrates the perfection that mercantilism, accounting, and naval fleet can have something in common. And to finish my presentation with lots of pictures, I want to show you, it's simply for fun maybe, the portrait of Peter the Great revived with the help of neural networks. So it looks like he is alive. It's just new illustration. So thank you for your attention, and I'm ready for any questions.
Oh, that's very good. Thanks. Thanks so much, Dina. That was a very wonderful presentation. We enjoyed the animation as well in the presentation. Very good. That's very good. Thank you for that. Thank you. All right. So our discussant for this paper is Marina, who has prepared some comments. Yeah, Marina is here.
Yes. Okay.
Please, Marina. Thank you.
First of all, I want to thank the organizers for an opportunity to take part in this webinar as a discussant. I share Dina Lvova's opinion that there are still many blank pages in Russian accounting history. Such meetings and discussions with our foreign colleagues motivate researchers to investigate some historical facts as a part of world history and to conduct comparative studies. Thanks to Dina Lvova for the clear and very impressive presentation. I want to stress that today we listen to representatives of two scientific schools in Russian accounting history from Krasnodar and St. Petersburg. Dina is a student and successor of Yaroslav Sokolov, who is the author of famous accounting history monographs. She is a representative of St. Petersburg academic tradition, and her attention to the period of the reign of Peter the Great is not accidental. However, it should be noted that her approach to exploring the influence of Peter the Great on the development of accounting in Russia is original, and it differs from other researchers. She focuses on the interrelation between economic conception of mercantilism, especially its military aspect, and systematic accounting in the context of Russia in the 18th century. I fully agree with the author that Emperor Peter the Great, who started the governmental reforms, was motivated by the purpose of constructing the modern navy, designed the accounting legislation based on mercantilist ideology and absolutist power. A feature of Russian case of mercantilism was that Peter wanted to copy military governmental style in people's private lives, and extended the totalitarian methods of government to all spheres of economic activity. Now I would like to make a few discussion points. There is a literature review in the introduction showing that the author studied this topic very well. I propose to expand this review and write a separate section devoted to the literature, which clearly identifies the author's contribution relative to other studies. The motivation and argumentation of the paper are quite clear. I would like to draw the attention of the author to only 2 points. At first, there are any description of accounting theory and practice before the reign of Peter in the paper. This description, maybe brief description, would help the author answer the question, why were Peter's reforms so necessary and relevant? At the beginning of the Peter the Great reign, the collection and distribution of public funds were carried out by many state bodies, and the number of these bodies was constantly increasing, which made it impossible to obtain clear and timely information about revenues and expenses of the treasury. The emperor implemented a new structure of government following European models, and he had attempts to implement a new style of government, rational and analytical. Secondly, the author perfectly solves the task set by her to explore the relationship between theoretical concept of mercantilism and accounting innovations implemented by Peter. But it seems to me that she should go further and analyze the inconsistency of this relationship. Emperor Peter began to create new government bodies based on Western models, fighting against the old administrative system and facing active resistance from officials and boyars. The procedures and format of account books described in the Admiralty regulations were unusual for Russian government officials. The introduction of new rules for bookkeeping did not mean that the automatic fulfillment of these requirements by all participants of economic relations. In practice, traditional methods continued to be applied to out of habit as routine procedures during many years. So it would be interesting to know how the rules of the Admiralty regulations were applied in practice. For example, account books of Berg College were drawn up in bilateral form, but if in the 1720s the left and right sides of pages were called as debit and credit, which was consistent with the Admiralty regulations, in the second half of the 18th century, the Russian words prihod and расход were used to the headings of pages in similar books. This fact meant that this terminology came back to traditional one, which had been used until the beginning of the 18th century. The control procedures required by the regulations were also carried out untimely and carelessly in all state institutions, even at the highest level of government. For example, in 1727, all colleges were ordered to submit their accounts for the previous year to the revision college for verification. However, the archive contains a special letter after 3 years later about the not submitted statements for 1726. Thus, it can be stated that the regulatory innovations first described in the Admiralty regulations and then extended to most Russian state enterprises were not implemented in practice or were implemented but with difficulty and not in time. However, thank you, Dina, for introducing such an interesting case to us. In my opinion, this paper is a good example of very fruitful approach in accounting history studies, not only to say about historical facts, who, when, and what did, but to analyze why he did this and what modern researchers can conclude on the basis of this case.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you so much, Marina. Thanks for that. Thanks for that. Please, if you have additional notes, feel free to send it to us or directly to Dina so that they can help to improve their work.
Okay.
Thanks very much. All right, thank you. Now we have time for additional comments or questions or any suggestions you want to make regarding the paper. Yeah, Richard. Yeah, that's fine. Thank you. That's great.
Okay, well, we're all very sorry we can't be in St. Petersburg this summer for the World Congress, but we hope to be there next year.
We hope so. We will be glad to welcome you.
Yes, I just had one technical question. You had a slide about the inventory accounting.
Yes, sure.
And you had receipts and disbursements of inventory measured in currency. And then you had another one, which I think is the stocks of inventory in puds and pounds. Puds are a physical measure, aren't they, of weight? It's not a currency measure.
Yes, you are right.
So
yes, it is.
I thought you said it was a Russian currency, but
no. It's a physical measure. You are quite right. Yes, some registers were introduced in currency, in rubles, and it was registers that collected data about cash, personal salaries, and budgeting, and other registers that collected information about stocks. They had only physical estimations, not in currency.
No, so there wasn't any question of valuing the...
No, it wasn't a double entry system of accounting, and they didn't prepare a balance sheet with all the assets in it.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Thanks, Richard. Thank you.
I think if I could add one thing, in the introduction, I think it would help. There is a series about Peter the Great on the television at the moment, but I haven't been watching it. It would help to have a bit of the history about why did he need a big navy then? Who was he fighting? Or was he just building up a precautionary defense system? Why did he want to expand the navy so much?
Okay, thank you for the question. He fought for the seashore, for trade, because Russia before Peter the Great had only one window to the sea. It was in Archangels, and it was very in the north. And he fought for the Baltic Sea, and he fought with Sweden almostly.
So this was so he could use St. Petersburg as a naval base?
Yes. He introduced St. Petersburg as a window to Europe.
Right.
And one of the main ports of the former Russian Empire.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Richard. Thanks so much. We have time for just one more comment or question. Yeah. All right. Thanks. So yes, Angelica, please.
So Diva, just one question. Thank you for your presentation. Because when you were answering Richard, you said, it was not double entry bookkeeping.
Yes.
And then I just would like to get a link with my presentation that would be the next one. Like when you say it was not double entry bookkeeping, what do you have in mind, to give this answer for us, just for me to understand, because I'm going to use that in my presentation.
I see. Okay.
What it's missing maybe, or, because if we decided to classify something, so this means you have the evidence in front of you, and then maybe you have a literature saying something. So what's the point for you to conclude that it's not double entry bookkeeping?
Okay, thank you for the question. I will try to answer it. Admiralty regulation introduced a scheme of accounting with separate accounts, which had debit side and credit side. So it looked like, with these terms, it looked like it's a double entry accounting. But why I say it wasn't? It seems that it was, first of all, because the Admiralty regulation didn't recognize a balance sheet as a final report, and it didn't introduce all objects in currency measuring. So the question from, yes, this is the question of Richard, and that's why it was impossible to prepare balance sheet, and that's why not all objects was included into the accounting system. For example, capital accounting was not introduced, accounting for some obligations was not introduced in this system. So it was not, according to Professor Sokolov, double entry accounting is a full circle accounting for all types of objects that are represented in the balance sheet. So if you talk about Admiralty regulation accounting, that was not a full circle accounting.
It can be confusing because lots of systems use the terms debit and credit.
Yes.
But they don't mean debit and credit in a double entry system. They just mean basically left-hand side and right-hand side, or the charge and discharge accounting. A lot of the actual accounts use debit and credit for charges and receipts. So as Dina says, it's normally we mean when you've got a full system, which could end even if it didn't actually do it, but in principle, you could derive a profit and loss account and a balance sheet.
All right, that's a very nice.
Thank you, Dean.
All right, so we're quite in time for the last presentation.
Coffee break first. Coffee break first.
Yes. Please pardon me. I think we should have a coffee break. Yeah, we should have that. We missed a few times. Yeah, we have 5 minutes for coffee break. If you want to sip your coffee by, that's fine. We'll just wait for that.
Yeah, hello, Mati. But yeah, my question was just to understand, because I'm gonna use her answer to illustrate what I'm trying to say in my paper. That was the point. And then like the answer that she gave me, and also the compliment that Richard make, really got the sense that what I would like to show people that it's missing in our accounting community. That's the point.
All right, that's fine. So the debit credit side, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's debit credit as in accounting record.
Yeah, because in accounting, like we have a lot of words that we, like if you get a book from the 15th century, whatever, they use it already.
Yeah.
But then the concept evolved on time. And then maybe today, what we mean when we say debit and credit, it's not exactly the same thing. But then just because when you were doing a research, you see the word in front of you, you have the impression that you understand what the person is trying to say. And then according to the history methodology, so the way we do research, we really need to try to really understand, like, to research what does it mean debit and credit for them, because then we can really analyze and we can explain if it's for sure the same sense or if the concept evolved on time. It's those kind of little details that I think it's sometimes missing in the research that we do in our community, because we think that everybody knows what we are talking about. And then maybe this is something that I learned in the history course that I did during my PhD, that you think that he thought he was thinking that way, but it was something completely different.
Yeah.
I was just actually using giving her the opportunity to Dina the opportunity to speak a little more, and then because this detail it's quite normal in our community, so we are all the time saying, this is not double entry bookkeeping, or this is double entry bookkeeping, or single entry, but then what's the reference you use to really classify or not classify, label as double entry, single entry, and then but I will comment on that during the presentation. But
may I add some little point?
Yeah.
It seems that it was very typical for state accounting reforms. It's the 18th century, perhaps in the 19th century, because I studied some Purber reforms of Austrian Empire in the 18th century, because it was very popular among Russian accountants. And it was introduced as a double entry accounting by its author. And lots of Russian accounting reforms, even in the 19th century, in Russian regions, was also introduced as the double entry accounting systems. So they understood it as double entry accounting because of, yes, you're quite right, because of terms. So they use some terms from double entry system, and it seems for them that they introduced a new modern popular fashionable something like this accounting system in the state administration. But when I tried to start what it was, I usually was disappointed because it wasn't double entry accounting as well. So yes, it was very typical.
All right, fine. So we're back now from the break. So we have to carry on. Okay. All right. So our third presentation now is the paper by Angelica and Lucia and Alan. So we'll hand over to you, Angelica, for your presentation.
Yeah, thank you. My paper is called Illustrating the Need for Interdisciplinarity in Historical Research, study of bookkeeping and financial reporting, 18th century large Portuguese companies. So you have the authors, and our agenda for today, it's quite simple. So I'll talk a little bit about my research problem, literature review, methodology, and then I will explain a little bit the context, what are Pombalin companies, so the large Portuguese companies. I will discuss and present just some findings that we have, and then my conclusions. So let's move. The research problem. So if you look at the title, we say illustrating the need for interdisciplinarity in historical research. And then I can say that this interdisciplinary nature of our field, so accounting history field, it's something well accepted in our community. For example, you can see the author here that really says that it's something inherent, so it's part of our gene, we can say, our DNA. But then we were thinking, like, but is it possible to produce an accounting historical study without being interdisciplinary? So this was one question that was in my mind. And then we started to ask us, what does it mean to be that interdisciplinary and that need for that interdisciplinary? And then we can say that the need, I will present a definition for interdisciplinary further, but then that need of interdisciplinary exists when we have, for example, according to the literature, one topic or one problem that cross the traditional, as I can say here, the traditional boundaries, disciplinary boundaries. So, for example, if you have a topic that economic historians are interested, accounting historians, people that study sociologic, humanities, when you have a topic that people are interested. So as Miller says, a topic that it's situated at the margins of accounting. And I really like that concept. And then when you have something like this, we may have a topic that we can apply the interdisciplinary way of doing research. That's the problem. So having this in mind, we decided to choose one topic that has these characteristics. So a topic that is important for in accounting community and also in another discipline. And then the other discipline that we choose was history. And then the topic was Pombalin Company. So you find a lot of papers in accounting history that talks about Pombalin companies and how they introduce some bookkeeping methods and how they were important for the economy in Portugal. So you have a lot of ways of perspectives of looking on Pombalin companies when you look at the papers. If you get historical works, you can also they also talk about Pombalin companies, and they are really interested in those companies because one product that they sell was slaves, and then they would like to understand if that business they were profitable or not, and how many slaves they introduced in one particular area. So this is the kind of worries and concerns that historians have in mind. But then we have one problem inside of that topic. And the problem means when we decided to talk about bookkeeping and financial reporting. So that's why we decided to choose, and I will display the example, that topic as a problematic one when we think to do interdisciplinary study. So, and what's the problem when we focus on bookkeeping and financial reporting? Both areas, so account historians and historians, they decided to talk about bookkeeping. Okay, let's start with the historians. You have the summary here, but let me give some more things. So historians, and I got two examples. So Carreira was the primary seminal, we can say, work that talked about Pombalin companies in Portugal, 1969, and then Dias, 1970s. And then Carreira, when you get this study and you read, he classified the bookkeeping, the entries that one Pombalin company used, he classified as confusing. And then when you get the work from Dias get all financial reporting for the one of those companies too, the Grão-Pará and Maranhão company, and he classified it at the end, saying that the financial reporting was medieval, so following medieval traditions. That was the comment. But then, so the picture that they present for us, it's not so good, especially if you had an accounting training during undergraduate program and graduate one. But then the problem is when we get account historians and they talk about accounting practice that we have inside of the Pombalin companies, they perceive that practice as positive. And they say some things like, for example, you find at the work from Pinto and West, they say that the accounting system developed and used by GMC, so one Pombalin company, was sophisticated and has a lot of details and blah, blah, blah. And so, and then we can see that, you know, the pictures that we get from those two areas, so those two disciplinary areas, they don't fit together. And they seem quite far apart. That's the point. And then we decided to study a little bit to try to understand why we have this scenario and why they are so far. I can tell you that there is a difference between those two studies, of course, because historians, they use more accounting records, as I say here, as a primary source. So they don't stop in the work to really analyze the accounting records, but they use the information from the account records to do other analysis. And for us, sometimes they evaluated for sure the accounting records And they also can use accounting records as source, as you can have at the historians. So because for us, the accounting record is not only a source in our research, but it's also an object of analysis. So this means, and of course, because it's our field, we have the responsibility to really to explain in detail what does it mean to do a record following, for example, single entry or double entry or dual entry, as we have at the literature today. And then that's the point that I think we need to understand, because if we do not clarify, as I said, for example, Dina during her presentation was saying that the documents that she analyzed was not double entry bookkeeping. But then if I don't explain, at least this is what I think, if you don't explain what you mean when you say they are not using double entry bookkeeping, so if I do not present the concept that I'm using to classify, this make difficult the life for an accounting young researcher, for example, that it's interested to understand the entries and the way we do the record, and also, and especially for someone outside of the accounting community. So a historian that is studying and he would like to understand what it is a double entry bookkeeping, why, why she didn't classify as double entry, what it's missing. And then, so this is the kind of information that most of us can say that it's just a detail, but it's a detail that really makes the difference when we are doing our research, because then we can classify and we can make good comments to really produce a more comprehensive knowledge about a subject. So for example, in this case, double entry bookkeeping financial report. So this is the scenario that we have. And then we decided to analyze all the documents that Carreira and Diaz also analyzed to really understand and to really check if we can say that the bookkeeping for sure is confusing, or if the financial reporting experience for those companies, if they are medieval. So this was the point. And just one more thing that I would like to highlight in this slide was because, for example, the GMC, it's one Pombalin company. Diaz said in her work that the company used single entry bookkeeping. But then if you analyze other sources like Ribeiro, they said that they use a double entry bookkeeping. And one thing that it's important is if you look at the reference that Diaz gave it to us, he used at least two sources from the time, so two primary sources, that tells us that the company used a double entry bookkeeping. But then we don't know why he at the end, he was trusting more in the reference that he got, and then he classified as single entry and not double entry bookkeeping. Just to show you something that it's confusing in his work. But let's move. Our literature research. So at this time, we divided the literature research in two topics. So the first one, we start to explain how researching account history has changed over the years. And then we talk about account history and interdisciplinary research. And at that point now, we are trying to improve the paper, explain a little more how to conduct an interdisciplinary research. That's the point. And then you can see some reference that I'm using. And the other topic we also explain is that relationship between account historian and historians. And I can say that that thing that we are including at this point, so one definition for interdisciplinarity and then how to conduct, I can say that I understand an interdisciplinary research or a research doing that way. It's a process that we have some characteristics, and then at the end, there is one key feature of this, and that key one is the integration. So if we think the word of knowledge, where we have a lot of boxes, and each box, it's a discipline, and inside of each box, we have a lot of dots of knowledge. An interdisciplinary interdisciplinary research, what the person wants to do is to get one topic that you can find in 2 different boxes. And then, you know, the person he or she, so the researcher needs to get the dots, identify them, try to connect them, and then integrate them to produce a new and more comprehensive understanding about the subject we are studying. So that's the concept I'm using when I say an interdisciplinary. And answering the question that I did at the end, yeah, it's possible to produce an account history study without being interdisciplinary. So if you do not promote that integration between the areas you are trying to connect, so there is no, it's not an interdisciplinary work. But let's move. Second part of the literature review, I'm talking about the complexity of double entry bookkeeping system. So, and then we are trying to explain the way we understand the accounting practices in general, and then I can tell you that it's an activity. I like that definition because it tells more what we do, and then it's an activity that's carried out by one person for another person. That's the point. And then we really need to understand this. So we are producing information to someone else. And then you need to understand all the constraint that that person that is producing have behind the person. So, and then, so this is one topic that we start to talking when we are describing the complexity. And then after we explain about the bookkeeping methods. So, and according to the literature right now, we can say that we have single entry bookkeeping, dual entry, and double entry bookkeeping. And those books that we have and papers that we have here, they explain us what we need to find that the evidence in order to classify something as single, dual, or double entry bookkeeping. So this is my literature review. And the methodology, I can tell you that the methodology that I'm using, I'm borrowing from the history. And why we decided to do that, because if I would like to promote that integration, I need to dialogue with them. So if I need to dialogue with them, we think that one good way to do that is to use the same kind of, you know, a methodology that historians, they know, because then I will produce something that they think it's relevant because it's according to the way that they produce knowledge. And then we can say that the analysis I'm producing, they shows interpretations and explanations. So I got the evidence and I try to give my interpretation and my explanation for those things. And of course, I will display some comments about bookkeeping and financial reporting. And because I use a lot of available archive documents, one thing that will have impact in the selection of the source I'm using, and it's an assumption that we need to declare when we are doing a historical research. It's in our study we try to get for sure the historical integrity of, and what does it mean? So I need to try to understand when, for example, I get a source and they say credit or debit, I need to understand exactly the concept behind that word. And so this is the way I say that I'm trying to ensure the historical integrity. And I will talk a little more about the selection of source. And in the writing process, I can tell you that we analyze the events on their own terms, so we avoid that wing interpretation of history. And then I have the things here. A little more about the methodology. I can tell you that we use comparisons in our analysis, as I say here, central place. And we are basing that way of doing research in MarkBlock. And we are doing 2 kinds of comparisons, as he says. So the comparison between neighbors, and that comparison between neighbors I will do when I'm analyzing the bookkeeping practice that the company uses. And also another kind of comparison when we compare things that are separated from time and space. And that kind of analysis I would do when I'm analyzing the financial reporting experience from those companies. And to analyze between separate between time and space, I'm going to use the example of English East India Company to compare with Pombalin companies. Moving a little bit more, let's talk about the primary resource because they are very important. So because of the epistemological choice that we did in the methodology we are following for history, we need to explain the source and we need to draw and to use more primary than secondary resource. And I can tell you that for sure we are using account records and also administrative documents. Of course, we use them in a different way. So account records, it was more to really understand the way they did the recording because bookkeeping is one object of analysis for us. But the administrative documents also helps us to understand the context of the company, for example, to understand their business model. And this is important because according to the business model that they are using, the accounting system, so the way they do the records, gonna have an effect. And so then we need to understand. You have the period I'm using for accounting records, and you find all those documents in two archives in Lisbon, Portugal, so Overseas Historical Archive and National Archive of Todo Tombo. So this is one block. Another block that we used, it was bookkeeping manuals published in Portuguese, and we are using 3 of them. You can also find at libraries in Portugal, and why and how we are using those sources. To do that analysis of comparisons of neighbors, because Bonavi, Salles, they lived in Portugal at that time. And I can tell you that, for example, the book of Bonavi, the patron of the book was a person called Inácio Ferreira Couto, and that person was a personal friend of Marquis of Pombal, so the primary minister that established the Pombalin companies in Portugal. For the second book declares at the title, for example, that the book is for those who are unable to attend to the school, Lisbon School of Commerce. That school, it's quite important because the School of Commerce was, we call it Aula de Comércio. The school was established in 1759, so the same year of that one Pombalin company was created. And we know that we have a relationship between that school and the Pombalin companies, and this relationship came from the third manual that we are using, Salles. Salles was a professor at the School of Commerce in Portugal, and I can tell you that at least one person that studied...
Sorry to interrupt you, Angelica. I'm very sorry to interrupt you. We just have 2 minutes left. Okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one person was he worked as accountant at the company, and here I'm trying to show you the documents that we use it for the English East India Company, and I'm using those documents to do that analysis that things are a part of time and space. And then the way I divided the analysis at the paper at the moment right now. So we do the comparison, but also we do a discussion to explain the base and all the assumptions that the historians they did to declare something. So here I have an explanation about the Pombalin company, so we can compare them. They are similar to Dutch East India Company. Large companies. In total, Pombal created 6 companies, but in this paper we are analyzing just 2 of them. The one that was affected had some activities in Brazil. So the findings. In terms of bookkeeping, I can tell you that they use 3 accounting books as, and this is similar, the finds you have at the literature, so at the manuals at that time. We have different levels of information in each book. So you have more information day book, a little less in journal, and then the ledger. And then, for example, if you get this transaction that you have information day book, journal, and ledger, and if you analyze only journal and you don't have the information of day book, you will miss all the details about the debtors, because the way we did the entry, we used an accountant called it sundry debtors. So, and then they didn't give you the list at the narrative. But so this is just one thing. And then here it's an example of a day book from the accounting. And I can tell you that at the paper we explain each sign that we have here and all the elements included at the transaction. We also have an example of journal, and I can say that they are in line with the recommendations at the time. When they do not describe, give a lot of details in the narrative, but at least they cite the source document that they are using. And so if you leave it at that time and if you get the document, you can understand for sure the whole detail about the transaction. And when we analyze the ledger, and this is an example of the ledger, they also introduced the Audit Trail, something that is important for the time, but they have something that it was not comment in the manual book. So they have an Audit Trail between the ledger going back to the journal, and then you have the sign there. In terms of the financial reporting, comparing to English intercompany, so this is the analysis from things that were apart. I can tell you that they are quite similar, but for sure, comparing all the details, we can say that the ones from public companies, they have more details. And for a stakeholder, for example, someone outside of the company that would like to understand how the business is going, I can tell you that public companies gives more support. So, and then we discuss the things between them. I think my time. Just to summarize, here I have the difference, and then I explain why they may say that they view it's confusing and it's medieval. I can say that we need the conclusion. We need to stress a little more to show how I do that interaction. In terms of bookkeeping, we can say that follow and it's comparable. Yeah, and then what it's missing maybe it's to show more this integration. So thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you, Angelica. Thank you very much. You have quite a lot to say. I understand that, a lot of some details in the paper. Thank you very much for that. Now we'll have time for Karen to discuss the paper, and then we'll take a few questions. Thank you very much. Karen, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think Angelica had quite a lot to say about this paper because it's a well-developed paper. It's an interesting paper looking at this importance of interdisciplinary engagement within historical research. I also have quite a lot to say, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to let them have my document that says various observations on their paper. And for now, I am going to summarize the points I'd like to make that apply generally, a little bit more generally to people and papers. So as I said, the paper is well written and the research is really thorough. What you really need to do now with this paper is to strive for more internal consistency. I think you need to reread and edit really carefully, because what you're trying to ensure is that your observations and your story all lead to the same place. So it's a good story, but it needs to be a consistent story. So in some parts of the paper, you discuss historians needing to work with accounting historians. And in other parts of the paper, you stress accounting historians working with historians. Again, I think you need to be a little bit more focused on that. I completely agree that both needs to happen, but at the moment, 1 minute you're saying one thing, next minute you're saying the other, and you go backwards and forwards, and there's no clear pathway through as to how that could happen. You look at the detail of the double entry book accounting for Portuguese companies, but then you end up comparing the final product, so the financial accounts of the East India Company. So in reading, and in fact in the presentation you explain this slightly better than it comes across in the paper. So actually I think maybe using your presentation, using the clarity you've sought for yourself in writing up the presentation to go back to the paper would now be a really good way of making it a little clearer to the reader what you're comparing, how you're comparing it, why you're comparing it, why at one stage you're looking at the bookkeeping, why at one stage you're looking at the final sets of financial accounts, and how those two complement each other. You also talk about using accounting manuals, and you also talk about using a lexicon or a mental frame. And as I said, that becomes a little confusing because there's no clarity in the way in which you, although you did present it very well today, but within the paper, there's a bit of a lack of clarity around the research. Your literature review, again, great literature review, quite lengthy. You use quite a lot of time to talk about the last 40 years of accounting history. And I think actually that's not really the focus of what you want to say. So I would seriously think about editing some of that out and just remaining a little bit more focused. And I also noticed that you've got some more up-to-date references in your presentation. You need to put those in the paper as well, because at the moment in the literature review, the latest reference is from at least 10 years ago. Again, you need to just be a little bit careful in the paper with unsubstantiated statements. You say, anyone aware of why accounting standards were first introduced in the mid-20th century knows that up to that point, bookkeeping and accounting were not subject to rules and regulations that engendered standardization beyond double entry bookkeeping. That needs some references, and it also needs some explanation actually as to what you're trying to say. So generally, as I said, I do have other comments, but I will wrap up here with saying, I think now you've got a really good paper. You just need to reread it, go back through it, edit it, ensure that you've got the golden thread running through. I'm always going on about golden threads, but ensure you've got that golden thread running through your paper so that you remain focused. Your literature review leads to your research, and your focus remains throughout what you're presenting to us within the paper and leads to your contribution. But thank you ever so much for a really, really interesting paper, and I enjoyed reading it and I enjoyed the presentation as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. Thank you very much. Yeah, so we have just a few minutes for any further comments or questions you have for this paper. Yeah, Richard, please. It's good to have you here, Richard. It's very good.
Sorry to always jump in straight away. I think it would help, because I haven't read the paper, obviously, to know where the Portuguese got their double entry bookkeeping from.
Yes.
Where did they learn about it?
Yes.
What were the manuals that were translated into Portuguese? So if you're comparing with the East India Company, well, we know the history of lots of manuals in the United Kingdom. How did it get to Portugal? Basic question.
And it is quite interesting because the paper actually says the two companies were obliged to use double entry bookkeeping by their bylaws, but it was virtually unknown in Portugal at the time. So accountants from other European countries were hired. And you're right, that's a really interesting observation.
I can tell you that they have French accountants, English accountants, and from German accountants, and from France.
All right.
But why? Why were they required by the bylaws to bring in those accountants when double entry bookkeeping wasn't being used in Portugal?
Yeah, because at that time, according to a shareholder of the company, double entry bookkeeping was not a well-known method in Portugal. Only few businessmen use it. And those businessmen who use the double entry bookkeeping were the ones that worked or had a relationship with someone from England, for example, or someone from France. Yeah, okay, and that's why they also created a school of commerce in Portugal to teach the method, to have more bookkeepers available, national bookkeepers.
All right, that's fine. I guess that those are some of the discussions if we want to stay behind, perhaps, and have that interaction later on. But I must thank everyone because our time is up. Thank you, everyone, especially to our presenters. That was a very good one. Please, hands of applause for them, please. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And our discussants, we thank you especially for making time to discuss this paper. We thank you very much, Martin, Pearson. Thank you very much. I know it's still very early in the morning where you are. Marina, thank you very much. And Karen, thank you very much for having time to discuss those papers. Please, if you have additional comments for the presenters, you can please put them together and send to us, or you can send directly to them. That would be very helpful. I'm happy to inform you that our next workshop will be on Tuesday, 20th of April. So you can make a note of that, 20th of April, Tuesday. Please, I think the registration will be through the BAFA website as well. Please, we encourage you to attend that because there are a few more papers coming up. All right, so thank you very much. This is the end of the workshop. I hope you return safely to wherever you're traveling from. I know you're traveling by Zoom, so that makes it easier. But please stay behind if you want to have good chats. They will still be here and they have time for other conversation. Thank you very much. Bye now. All right.
Thank you, Matt, for chairing.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yourself now, and then sure we can have time to talk. Thank you very much.